All right, we'll call the board meeting to order. So just quick updates. Just wanted to give a couple of shout outs to Jesse and Javid. I know they recently received the London's 20 under 40 recipients. I thought they were both under 30, but all right, that works too. So congratulations on behalf of the London Police Board. So I'll look for any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Seeing none. We have some introduction of some new business items. And apologies if my voice doesn't sound as smooth as it usually does. Just have a cold. So the 2020-2023 LPS proposed budget, assessment growth funding for 2020, and the CSP Ontario transfer grant by Deputy Betts, and the 2020 board schedule by myself to add those items to the agenda. Moved by Jeff, seconded by Vanessa. All those in favor to add those items? Great, that carries. So it's always great. We have some exciting guests here with us today. We have a presentation from on behalf of the London Police Services Board. So before I get to that point, I did want to ask Constable Teresa Elliott to just maybe turn over to one of the microphones and let us know a little bit about Peace and YIPI scholarship in the program and give us a little background.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a huge pleasure for me to be here today just to honor some of the youth that have worked with us in the summer. So the PEACE program is the Police Ethnic and Cultural Exchange Program, which is a summer employment program where high school youth come and work with us for the summer. And then the YIPI team, the Youth in Policing Initiative, is also a summer program, which is run by the diversity officer. And that brings youth into our organization, and they do a variety of different things in the building and in the community as well. One of the goals of the PEACE and the YIPI program are to develop the skills and leadership abilities that are already in youth and just need to be worked on and a little bit of mentoring given to them. But I think one of the really great things that we do with them is they do a lot of stuff in the community where they can learn more about different religions, but also about different organizations that are happening. We have a 4-day Indigenous youth cultural exchange that takes place. And then, of course, for the youth, one of the great things that continues is that the Police Services Board has this bursary for them. So every year there are up to 4 youth that could take advantage of that. And just recently that it was included that the Youth and Policing Initiative youth can apply for that as well. So it really helps out for these youth to have just that extra bonus of some of that financial burden taken off of them. But also I think it's kind of cool that they get to come back and see us and that we get the update about what they've been up to as well. So I appreciate the board supporting these youth in their secondary adventures and helping them out financially.
Thank you very much, Constable, and thank you for that great background. So I'll ask, I'll just read a very brief synopsis of what the scholarship, sorry, just a little quick brief, but I'll ask the Vice Chair to just come in front of the board, and then as you hear your name, and the Chief and the Vice Chair to just come up over here in the front, and then as you hear your names, if you can just come up to the front here and we'll do a photo together. So I'll just wait for the Chief to make his way over there. Let's see if he's still quick at marching. So great. So the Peace and YIPI scholarship checks, they're $1,000 each. And I'm proud to announce on behalf of the London Police Services Board, they'll be presented to Aiden McKay, Brandy Chian, and apologies for the pronunciations. Brandy, if they're not here today. Fozia, is Fozia here? Fozia is not here. And Sarah Ibrahim Mohammed. Great, and I'll just turn over to Jennifer just as I'm making my way around for the photo.
As I explained to these lovely young people 5 minutes ago, I forgot the checks back at the office. So I am going to personally deliver them tomorrow. So I will touch base with you tomorrow. And I'll see about getting one day's worth of interest on that for you as well.
And I know they have to leave, so don't feel obligated to have to stay for the rest of the meeting, because I know you guys have to go back to university and school and stuff like that. So thanks for joining us today. So look for a motion for the minutes from the September 26th public meeting. Moved by Jeff, seconded by Javid. Any discussion? Call the question. All those in favor? Carries. So we have a public correspondence letter response from Steve Clark, Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, in response to the LPSB's August 29th, 2019 letter relating to housing and poverty issues in London. And I'm sure that's also related to the letter that the chief also wrote in his capacity. And a letter to the Solicitor General, Sylvia Jones, regarding reappointment of Vanessa to the LPSB board. So look for a motion. Moved by Susan, seconded by Javid. Any discussion, any comments? Seeing none, it's great to see advocacy works, so that's great, and great to see responsiveness from our government. So all those in favor? Great, carries. So quarterly reports, I'll turn over to Deputy Chief McIntyre for complaints against police.
Good afternoon, thanks very much. Through you, Chair, to the board. Every quarter we produce a document which really outlines our complaints about the police to the public, and you'll see really this is a document that looks at a trend. And the seriousness of a complaint is really basically all complaints to us are treated seriously, but when we look at that definition of serious, that's really defined by the Police Services Act. You'll see complaints could come through the Office of the Independent Police Review Director, so OIPRD. They can also be generated in-house by the Chief of Police. So I just wanted to explain kind of the difference between those. We enjoy hearing from the public. We want to hear from you. Obviously, our goal is to police the city. So we take them all very seriously, but the serious word is often defined by the Police Services Act. So I just wanted to highlight that for the report for you today. Moving forward, we do plan next month to have a presentation to the public on what does this mean? What does this what are the stats contained in this? What are the definitions of some of those charges that are found within the Police Services Act? So that there's a greater level of understanding. What we know for sure is that we have amazing officers, and a very small percentage are ever complained about, but when those complaints come in, we do treat them seriously, and we report back on them so that you, the public, are aware. And as you see to the board, it goes back to the board. So I just wanted to give some bit of an overview. You'll see that it's a 5-year trend. We know that statistical relevance in these, we often look at a 6-year trend for statistical relevance, but you can see some of them are elevated. What it doesn't really get into explaining to you is the volume of complaints that we receive, or that OIPRD receives, that actually are screened out, meaning they are found to be frivolous or vexatious. So one can't look at the total number, but also needs to really drill down and see what of those complaints, how many of those actually had merit, and then what was the outcome of them. And you'll see many are deemed under the Police Services Act as less serious. So I just wanted to give the board, through you, Chair, just an overview of that, and you can see if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Thank you, Deputy. I look to the board for any questions or comments. Javid?
Thank you to the deputy for your comments. I just wanted to say that in some ways, I see this as a metric for engagement. Something I was struck by when I went on my first ride along, I think last year, was the amount of time and the diligence with which the senior officers are responding to complaints. Irrespective of the nature of the complaints, there's a level of compassion and humanity that they engage with when they validate members of the community who express their concerns. In my world in health, reporting actually is a metric of increased safety, because when the culture is safe, people are feeling welcome to speak up and share their concerns. I know I come from an ethnic community where we don't typically do that. And I've talked to folks in my community and encouraged people when they have concerns, questions, to take the opportunity to engage with our service, to have those conversations, because if we don't extend ourselves and engage in those conversations and burn our energy negatively without talking, then it doesn't make our community safer. So I just wanted to add that context to your presentation.
Thank you, Javid. Look for any other board members. Vice Chair?
I just wanted to highlight again that I'm really looking forward to having the presentation in November. I think that'll be very important, not just for the education of the board, but for the public, because obviously when you look at these numbers, there's no context to them, and if you're just looking at it and you aren't a lawyer or don't have experience, you might not know, well, what is this section 60? So I think that's going to be very important, so I want to thank administration for doing that. Before we get there though, since we do have these numbers in front of us today, there's obviously little upticks here and there. Is there anything, when you receive these, what do you do if you see an uptick? Is there one that concerns you? Or are there any trends? How do you respond and so on? Maybe give us a little bit of that now, a little preview of what we'll hear in November as well.
For sure, thank you very much. So when I review them every quarter, I'm looking for that trend. Is something going up? Is something going down? If there's an elevation, then you drill down into the why. What is going on there? And then what is the seriousness of the complaint that we've received? When I say seriousness, I hate using that word because we want to hear from you. And it's important that you give us your feedback. So we treat them all very seriously, but when I use the word serious, please just know I'm referencing the Police Services Act. So what is the conduct? The number one complaint oftentimes the police receive would be that of incivility. And we know, there's many drivers to that, but at the end of the day, it's about professionalism, and we course correct that. When we know better, we do better. So we look at what is trending up. Is there something that's going to generate risk? Is there something we need to educate on or do something different? Oftentimes when we, for example, neglect of duty or insubordination means maybe an officer didn't follow the rules outlined in procedure. And so we go back to our procedure. What is that? What was the error made? Can we educate? Can we do something different to prevent those from coming? So when I look at this report, it really is status quo. We see some ebb and flows. We don't see anything that jumps off the page at us as being a red flag. But we always are looking to course correct at the earliest moment of opportunity. So thanks for that.
And I think one of the things that somebody had pointed out to me is that sometimes increase in numbers can be automatically seen as a negative, and yet the flip side is it means that the public is more engaged, more willing to come forward, more willing to say, this was wrong, and I know there's a mechanism for dealing with that. So is that something as well that you're tracking?
Yeah, thank you. So you're absolutely right in saying that as we educate the public into how do you lodge a complaint against the police and what is the vehicle to lodge a complaint against the police, we know a lot of that now is done online, and we see that change in technology and the reporting structure. We would expect to see that accessibility increase. And so therefore the police will receive more complaints from the public or concerns from the public. Often that is funneled through OIPRD, which is an independent agency. We love that. It really keeps it separate. It gives us that clean lens to view issues from, so I love that. In saying, though, is it education? It's funny in a statistics world, you say when we have more police doing a specific task, could we also increase crime just by the mere fact that there's more police there? Very similarly, when we have this education system about complaints, would we expect now that the public are more informed to see more complaints come in? Absolutely. And I think that's a positive as it relates to oversight and in policing functions for the community.
Any other board members? If the board will allow me through the chair, I guess if I could speak through myself. If it's helpful, I think for the public, if it's helpful, maybe when we talk about the conduct complaints, service complaints, and policy complaints, are you able to give us very briefly, very super briefly, just kind of the difference between each of those, I think for those following at home, for our many viewers?
Absolutely. So conduct complaints would be just as the word suggests. So conduct about an officer. So that a member of the public has a concern specifically with how they were treated by the officer. That would be a summary. Service complaints is the service. Maybe that relates to how long it took for a police officer to actually get to your house or, to see you in relation to a call for service. But not when the officer maybe attended, they were pleasant and professional and all of that was well, but you're upset with the delay. So we'll see often complaints come in relation to that. When we look at policy, wasn't just a mere fact that how the police policy is written and our procedure and the rules of engagement and what the order of operations, if you will, that we will follow to complete an investigation or concern from the public. If you're unhappy with that, That often we see those come in as a policy concern, and really that would be interchangeable to our procedures. What is laid out? How should we respond to those and investigate or handle that certain concern or complaint? So that's kind of the difference between the three.
Perfect, Deputy. And the reason I asked that question was because my follow-up comment is that I know personally, and I think even maybe the chief has done this as well, is with service complaints, I've encouraged people to complain about the levels of service. It's not a negative reflection of the service, but it's just the reality of the world that the police are living in and the expectations. Because regularly I heard from members of the community saying, I had to wait 2-3 hours, so now I'm, and I've had the conversations with the chief. I'm like, how do you want me to communicate that? Like, let us know, complain, and bring that information forward. So my colleagues on council are doing that, and many other people in the community are now more so doing that ever than before, from my experience in previous years. And that's why I think you see that number going from 5 to 16, more than tripling, because I think there's more education. And I think it's always important to continue to encourage people to complain when they have the valid complaints as well. The other thing I think that I feel that's important to mention, and maybe Deputy, you can kind of respond to it if I'm accurate or not. But more than ever now, we have more interactions in the public than ever before, obviously because population, and obviously because of more of the work that you're doing. Is that something that's also a reality and a factor that we should be, when we're looking at this data, consider?
Sure, thank you. So yeah, it's exactly that. The more the police are involved with the community, the more we engage the community, the more that we are present, the more that we are interacting with the community, obviously the increase then of some of those interactions to not be perceived well, or for an officer not to be professional. We know that we have over 600 officers, and when you look at the number of complaints that come in, and if you actually did the math statistically, you'll see that it's really a small percentage of our total number of interactions. So yes, as the population grows, as the size of the police organization grows, and the number of times we're dealing with the public, could we then drive those stats ourselves? Absolutely. But what's also a great comparison, just to underpin that, is that we have amazing people and a crazy volume of calls that we deal with every single year. And when you look at that annually, you'll see that it is such a small percentage of those interactions that aren't favorable. So thank you for highlighting that.
Thank you. And I think my last comment was, it's kind of something what I already said, but, I think the awareness is always helpful. And I think let's take this opportunity again and, encourage the public when they have valid complaints to come forward. And I think that's always important. And I think the chief has done that with with his senior executive recently, very regularly, when they're doing these interviews where we're talking about just a lot of things that have been coming up in the news. And I've heard those interviews where they're saying, educating the public is saying, this is how you complain, and this is how you file a complaint. So I think the word's getting out a lot more, and I'm thankful for the public, and I think this is, and I'm looking forward to the November meeting where the reports will have a little bit more background and understanding for the members of the public. So not seeing anyone else wanting to speak on this matter. Look for a motion to receive. Moved by Jesse, seconded by Vice Chair. All those in favor? Carries. Great. So the next item we'll be dealing with, we'll just be waiting on that. It's the 2020-23 budget. We'll be coming back to that because we'll need to go in camera before dealing with that, as well as number 9, which is assessment growth. So we're going to go into the patrol modernization project. So Deputy, are we good to roll? Great.
Just as a matter of introduction, and I'll turn it over to our chief too, if he has comments. Patrol modernization is an exciting new initiative with London Police Service. It was something that I personally was involved in with Detective Whitford, who's at the front of the room, and a whole team of people with administrative function at London Police. And it really is looking at how do we handle the call volume and everything we do from a service component, but then how can we attack that a different way to drive efficiencies and to change really how we respond to policing in general. Often we know that that is driven out of analytics and looking at the evidence and what is going on, what is researched, and how do we take that and then change how we do business every day to be more modern and efficient and all of those things. Oftentimes it's not about responding. We look to prevent crimes, you know, and you'll see that pendulum swing and more to a prevention model when we have capacity to do so. We know that this is greatly rooted in technology and obviously the drivers of technology. And so I'm more than happy to introduce you to Detective Andy Woodford, who is oversees our whole crime analysis unit at London Police Service. For this presentation, I got to work with Andy, so I'm proud to introduce you and let you, you're the expert in this, so I'll let you take the floor. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. So this patrol modernization, I got about 15 minutes to cover a lot of deep topics. So I'm really gonna touch on it, but I'm gonna take a minute to dive way back into 2011 when then Superintendent Williams approached me and said, how can we better use analytics and data? How can we better use our crime analysts to do better? So I took a few months and scanned the environment internationally, locally, found out what everybody was doing, came up with some different things myself, and then submitted a report to him. And then in 2013, we started to implement those things. Since then, that was us dipping the organizational toe in the water. And we got comfortable with using analytics. Our crime analysts, we switched from constables to our civilians who all have master's degrees in various different things. And we got comfortable with how do we use the data, how do we analyze it, what's the outcomes of that? Are we actually reducing crime and disorder? And beginning of last year, took the next step, which is the patrol modernization. So this has been a long time coming, but now we're actually seeing this. We're ready to make the move organization-wide into using data analytics and research to implement this, what is essentially an intelligence-led policing approach. So we've used the analytics through crime analysis, data analytics for our business analytics unit, and research to come up with an organizational-wide, or as the slide shows, an executive implementation of our intelligence process to better use the data that we have to figure out what's happening, what does that mean for us in the city, and then how do we do better to service the city. So we've essentially come up with, I came up with this as a visual representation. At the bottom of the triangle, you see we have our crime analysis. So our analysts look at all the things that are happening in the city and try to make sense of that. We also use evidence-based policing, which is what works in policing, combined with our analytics to come up with responses for offender-based strategies and location-based strategies, which I'll touch on a little bit more. And we do this in an envelope, which is, we call the problem-oriented policing, which is, goes back to the 70s, when it first came up in academic research, and has really become a thing. We started training officers in that, all of our officers in that. So now this has become an organizational-wide thing. And then around the outside, you see I have business analytics, because all of this has to happen in a corporate framework. We only have so many officers to do the work. We have so many other things to do. How do we make it happen? And we use business analytics to help us figure out how to do that with the resources at hand. So I talked about, touched on crime analysis. I did a previous presentation a couple of years ago. I'm not sure, I think the board's completely changed since I was here last, but essentially we have 5 crime analysts and myself looking at everything across the city to see what is happening from, it could be an address where noise complaints have jumped for some reason in a short amount of time, all the way up to a robbery series, pharmacy robbery series, so, and everything in between. And trying to figure out what's happening, why it's happening, and then come up with what can we do about it. I've included their expertise there, their complementary master's degrees, just so you get some sense of what they're all about and how they work together. We have the complementary expertise because I'm looking for a holistic vision of crime and not just somebody who knows one thing, a lot about one thing. You'll see the war studies up there. That's actually a second master's degree for one of our people. So if you're wondering why war studies is up there, it's a second degree. So we use this, we use the analysts in conjunction with our evidence-based policing. So in a nutshell, I think the chief said it best in one of his previous communications, right? Involves implementing practices that have been tested and shown to be effective in reducing crime and disorder. So what has worked in the past? And a lot of people have done the research on this, not just police agencies, but a lot of academic work is done on this. America, Britain, Canada, we've got all these university experts, PhD candidates, all studying all different aspects of policing, trying to figure out what works. And we also want to know what doesn't work, so that we can use their research in conjunction with our own analytics to figure out what we need to do next. So our analytics will tell us what the problem is, where the problem's happening, when it's happening, who's doing it, and then we want to figure out next, what do we do? So we go to the research, right? Sometimes it's informal research that we rely upon because maybe there's nothing better. A lot of the times there's a lot of good academic research to tell us. And we take that, or we take the pieces of it we think might work in London and use that, right? And it hasn't been that long. We stole the idea of evidence-based policing from the medical world, and they've been doing this for decades, and we're just now getting into an evidence-based policing world, right? The phrasing might have been around for a lot longer, but it's really the last 10 years that Canada's starting to see an evidence-based policing approach. What works? Instead of putting an officer into an area because there's a pattern of thefts from an area, and then no thefts occur, and we say success, now we look at it and go, well, was there gonna be any thefts there anyways? For example, what's the interval between offenses? If we put an officer there for 4 days, are there other 4-day gaps when officers weren't there that there were no crimes? So we're not afraid to look at it and say, well, we don't know if it worked or not. So that's what we really wanna know. If we're gonna spend all this money on officers and deploying them to different areas, we need to know it works. So that's a different way of thinking for Canadian police. In terms of the evidence-based policing, we partnered with the Canadian Society of Evidence-Based Policing, and we're lucky enough to have Dr. Laura Huey, who is the director and founder of this organization at Western. So we do a lot of work with her, and even if she's not doing the work with her and her PhD students, we use her expertise to help guide us, right? We all have our master's degrees in our office, but we love having her PhD expertise and her decades of experience to help guide us into figuring what's working in London and should we keep doing it. And we want to avoid this, right? We want to avoid the spurious correlations, right? So you look at this chart and go, yeah, there's a correlation, but that doesn't make any sense, right? There's a confounding variable in there. Just like the interval between offenses. We put somebody there and there was no thefts, but does that really mean we did our job? So we're trying to avoid that. So we want to figure this out. Did we actually solve the problem? Is what we did responsible for what did occur? In this mindset now, starting 2 years ago, we've hosted in 2017, 2019, and scheduled again for next year, this critical thinking course where we're sending our officers to learn how to think critically. Because everybody wants people to think critically, but they never tell you what that actually means. It doesn't mean thinking hard about something, right? So we actually want them to think about it, right? So part of the critical thinking is recognizing your biases, right? Higher order thinking, right? What are thinking problems? And this is a week-long course, right? A lot of interaction in this course, and so far all the feedback has been positive. People come out of this thinking differently. They avoid tunnel vision. For example, critical thinking involves hypothesis development. So if you think this is a good idea, then you need to think about why it's not a good idea and force yourself to think about other ideas that might be as good or better. So just touch on that real quickly. But so that's one of the strategies towards getting our organization into this new way of thinking, which we need to go to the end game, which is modernizing the way we patrol the city. So for example, we might use our analysis and research to deal with offender-based strategies. So our crime analysts and the research that's out there, if we look at our prolific offenders essentially are offenders who have a high frequency of offending combined with a severity of offending. And we rank them based on a combination of those factors. And there's an enormous amount of research out there about what to do with these people. So if you looked at our top offenders, you'd probably find most of them in the city in terms of frequency and severity of offending have a mental health issue, have a drug or alcohol issue, right? Have resulting issues such as homelessness, joblessness, which are issues that police can't deal with. right? And continuing to arrest these people, if you look at the person, these are all fake names, but if you look at the person at the top of the list, we actually do have somebody who in the last 3 years was arrested 60 times, right? And has a total of 130 occurrences. And well, if we arrest that person for the 61st time, it's not gonna solve anything because that person has mental health issues and drug issues, right? So when we look at these offender-based strategies, we need to know what our problems are from a policing perspective and then partner with the appropriate agencies to get them help and not send them through the criminal justice system wherever possible. So that's one of the strategies. In terms of location-based strategies, an example is our risk modeling, where we look at, okay, where are the, for example, in this, where are the break-and-enters happening to homes in the city? And this is a year. If we look at this, we can use our models to figure out, okay, if a break-and-enter happens, the ones on the map are the ones that are already happened in the blue dots. But if a new one happens in the white area, those are low-risk areas, we treat it one way. If we go to the red areas and say we've got a break-and-enter that's just happened, a residential break-and-enter that's just happened in the red area, then that is a higher risk area, and that tells me that if there's one, there's probably gonna be more. And we come up with different models for the low to high risk on what the percentage is of something else happening there. And that again informs our deployment model, right? So instead of just sending officers out on random patrols, where are they happening? Where's the highest risk? As soon as we see an indicator of risk, then we can do something different with that. So. And we do that in this problem-oriented policing package. So problem-oriented policing is typically we look at the tip of the iceberg. In policing, we show up, and in my own vernacular, I call it the swoop model of policing. We swoop in, we deal with what's in front of us, and we swoop out. We're now moving away from that. We want to arrive, we want to find out what the underlying causes are, and if those are causes that we can't deal with, such as mental health, then we need to find out who to partner with or who's going to come in and help us solve the rest of it. Who's going to look at the rest of the iceberg with us and figure that out. And we do that in a structured problem-solving manner, which is our problem-oriented policing structure. Scanning, we analyze the problem, we come up with a response, and then we assess whether our response was useful. And we attack one side of our triangle here. We either try to address one or more. We either try to address the victims, the offenders, or the location, and use different strategies based on what we think will work to address at least one side of the triangle. Because you need those three things to come together to have a crime or an incident of disorder. So it means more than just quick fixes, right? We need to figure out what's underneath, what's the actual rest of the iceberg look like, and what do we need to do to address it. No quick fixes, because most of the time sending an officer to a scene is just the Band-Aid, right? So we want to get rid of the Band-Aids, and we want to come up with in-depth creative problem solving, right? To deal with, as I already mentioned, a lot of these issues that are not police issues to deal with. So we're training all of our officers. We actually have training ongoing yesterday and today, which should bring us up to about 120 officers trained. Day one is evidence-based policing, getting them to think differently, that there's this whole world of research and a whole different way of doing things out there. Because when I was hired as a police officer, like most officers, I sat in a chair and somebody said to me, "Why do you want to be a police officer?" And we all gave some version of we want to help. Right? But our idea in our head was we want to help by arresting bad guys. But it is so much more than that, that this training starts to break that down and try to think about what else is there besides arresting bad guys. And then day two is operationalizing that, all that research and that different way of thinking into problem solving. So we do all this, of course, as I mentioned, in our business, in the envelope of what we have available to us. So business analytics is analyzing that envelope. Right? We only have so many officers who have so many hours in the day to dedicate to this. We have other priorities. So our business analytics unit is breaking down what the officers are doing by creating these new busy codes. Not sure if that's been mentioned in previous, but instead of just going reactive, proactive, now we actually want to know what they're doing in detail so we can figure out the best ways to deploy in support of doing a better job for the city and offering better services, right? So we started that this year. So it's an ongoing process to figure out what they're doing and how better to deploy them, keeping in mind the problem-oriented policing aspect. So. And then sector-based strategic deployment is part of this patrol modernization. So the first part I talked about is how do we figure out what's happening in the city and how do we respond to that better? Then we also need the framework of, we've got these officers out there, instead of random patrols and just reacting one call at a time, we've redistrict into sectors as opposed to having 21 different areas of the city, which we used to have, and officers would be stuck on their little area, piece of property. We've broken this up now into 7 different sectors. So the officers can start working in a team policing environment, and instead of one officer looking after their patrol beat, now we have several officers clustered in a sector, and they can work together both on their shift and across different shifts and patrol sections to solve a problem. Because we know that if there's a problem at one address, just because I go on my days off, that problem hasn't dissipated, so we need to pass that off to the next shift, or to the night shift from a day shift. So we've got rid of the beats. We've got the 7 sectors, and the 7 sectors are based on the problem-solving approach. So we look at, if you look at the city, we respond to the calls all over the city, but the concentration of calls and the concentration of problems are where the population density occurs. And if we look at some of these spots, the elevation of those hexagons represent the volume of calls. So if we look at the south end, the tallest one, that's White Oaks Mall, an area. Well, it's not because White Oaks Mall inherently has anything wrong with it. It's because that is where there's a strong density or a high density of people interacting with one another, right? There's lots of other high density areas, but people aren't interacting with each other. So that's typically what we see. So we've clustered these so that the problem areas, or the areas we expect to be able to make the biggest difference, are separated amongst the sectors so that these problem-solving teams can then go in and try and deal with that. And are we gonna get rid of every call at White Oaks Mall? No, there's always gonna be a shoplifter. Can we reduce them? I think we can. So can we get rid of some of the trouble with people call or trespasser calls? Is there a better way to do it, either through location-based strategies or offender-based strategies? So that's, that in a nutshell is what we've been doing in the last year. And this is gonna be a multi-year process because we need to change a culture, a way of thinking, and provide training to all the officers and let them practice this method. So thank you for your time.
Phenomenal presentation, and appreciate the Google Earth map. You know, I think this is definitely revolutionary. This is very forward-thinking here for London. So, Deputy, did you want to say anything further? And before I go to the board?
No, thank you. I just wanted to thank Detective Whitford. His team of people, truly amazing to work with. The analysts are incredibly talented, and also underlining that is our IT, that infrastructure and IT. And then he is circled at the business analytics unit. Those people, incredibly talented, do amazing work, and you'll see moving forward will change how policing is administered in the City of London. So it's a great job. Thanks for your presentation.
I had some comments to make at the end, but unless there's comments or questions from the board first.
Yeah, I'll go to the board first. So, Susan, Javid, and Jesse.
Thank you so much, Detective Whitford. That was, I echo, that was a great presentation. A couple of things, some questions. You mentioned that there was just some training, about 100 officers. Is the goal ultimately for every single police officer to go through this training? Is there various levels of training depending on whether you're a crime analyst versus constable? Like how does that work?
So the training is for everybody at all ranks. And the way we're presenting the training is everybody gets the same package, but there's an assignment at the end where they actually have to go out and identify a problem and use the principles that they're taught to solve that problem, including meeting with whatever community group they need or asking for money for some project or something, as they would in the real world, right? And then this project, but the difference is we stratify the project. The constables and sergeants are responsible for identifying the problem and developing the actual project. But then the process that it would take in real life is that it would be sent to their staff sergeant, then to an inspector or superintendent for ultimate approval. Those higher ranks are also aware of all the principles, so they need to now apply their critical brain to what they're seeing in this project plan, and does it now meet the new thresholds we've set for an acceptable project plan. So they all get the same material, but they're applying it differently in that end project.
You had mentioned that one of the things was shifting, did you use the word culture? I'm not sure. But just the mentality, the approach. Talk to me a little bit more about that. Is that just because we've done it so long a different way? And I know there was a probably pretty significant shift going from beats to this sector, and how is this something that everyone's embracing? And just a little bit more about that.
Sure. So I think in policing, we all get hired, as I said, like I got hired and somebody said, why do you want to be a police officer? Because I want to help. But then we all had a similar idea in our head of what it meant to help. And it was always some version of catching bad guys, right? So, but what we deal with really is less bad guys and more people in need, right? So we need to get people thinking about that the person who'd been arrested 60 times before doesn't need to be arrested on the 61st time because he stole a bottle of Listerine necessarily, right? Depending on what mindset he's in and there's all a bunch of factors. But as an example, if he steals a bottle of Listerine because he has an addiction issue, then is the right avenue to do what we normally do and just arrest him, throw him through cells over the courthouse and whatever happens from there? Or is the right avenue to engage the addiction services with this person and think differently about what to do? So that's what I mean in terms of it's thinking differently, which is going to affect our entire culture.
Thank you. So I learned a number of things in your presentation. Thanks for the presentation. I think this visualization is very relevant to the question I wanted to ask, which is, you seem like you're trying to balance out the sectors sort of by intensity, right? So you look at, okay, what's the patterns here, and we'll try and make them so that they're not lopsided, to use a kind of crude term. But you know, the crimes themselves and the pattern of crime is a dynamic thing. So you sort of set up the sectors, but then, you know, if you're successful, for example, with problem-oriented policing initiatives, like it would change over time. So how do you adapt the patrol sectors and the deployment within those sectors to something that is, constantly changing? This makes it look like it's kind of a fixed thing, but obviously it's not. This is just the sum total of something over time. So how do you speak to that?
Yes, so we're actually doing a review of the sector model to start with. Are these sectors right? Because they were built around problem areas, balancing that with calls for service. But is that set in stone? No. Is it difficult to change? It is, because there's so many other things that need to change along with it. But I know that from the beginning, we've always said that this is not set in stone, that if priorities change, then we will change the boundaries. Our first step would probably be to change the staffing, so that if one of the sectors started to become more of a problem, then we shift the staffing over to that area, or we have a staffing model that goes along with this. But for now, it's year one. We'll use our business analytics expertise, not me personally, but our business analytics unit, to figure out, is this working? Is this providing better service? Is something else suffering because we're doing this? And look at the whole envelope and say, do we keep it the way it is? Do we tweak it? Do we change it completely? And then that will undergo a regular review to determine if it's still working. Because a big thing about the evidence-based policing, the analytics is it working? Not just at the crime pattern level and the response to a chronic noisy address, but is it working at the organizational level too? So constant review is necessary, and I know that we're committed to doing that too. So.
Look for any other speakers from the board before I go over to the chief. Chief?
I just want to thank Detective Whitford, just say a few words about him. He doesn't give himself enough credit. Andy worked in the crime analysis unit for a number of years, probably almost 10 plus years in total, and is largely responsible for the growth we've seen in that area, and the expertise is incredible. When we decided to civilianize the area and grow it about 4 years ago or so, Andy oversaw that, and he brought in the civilian talent, who are quite talented, master's degrees in a variety of areas, as he explained. Andy oversaw the implementation of the crime mapping, which most people are familiar with, that's on our website, and all the predictive work that he's spoken about. And while he did all this, he went out and got a master's degree by himself in intelligence analysis. So he is, I can't say enough good things about him. Unfortunately, Andy's retiring in the very near future.
You're so young.
He started when he was fresh out of grade school, I think. Yeah, he was 12. So, we wouldn't be, and I say this quite honestly, we wouldn't be where we are without Andy and what he's done. When I get calls from city councilors and from business groups and other people in the community about things going on in their ward or in their area of the city, and I want to get a snapshot of in real time of what the crime activity is, I call Andy, and either he or one of his staff within days have a heat map or statistical data together, which most of you have seen, which really assists me. He's always been a go-to person. So I thank Andy for me, myself, and behalf of the organization. So thank you.
So Andy, again, on behalf of the London Police Service Board, thank you for this presentation, and I think the retirements usually come to us. Maybe we could just not approve that retirement, so to keep you here a little bit longer. There you go. I'll give you the final word if you had anything else you wanted to say. Steve.
No, just thanks for your time today. I know I'm leaving at the end of November, and this is, I kind of wish I wasn't leaving, because it's a super exciting time. 5 years from now, this is gonna be a different organization, right? It's gonna be great people still, we're gonna do the same great job we do, but we're gonna do it smarter, and we're gonna start doing things. I think the community's gonna be very happy when we start dealing with the underlying issues and don't just have the swoop model of policing, right? When we actually spend some more time, I think the community's just gonna love it. So I wish I was staying in that. It's bittersweet, but again, thanks very much.
Thank you very much. So look for a motion to receive that presentation. Moved by Jesse, seconded by Susan. Anything from administration further? Anyone else? Board? All those in favor? Carries. Great. Thank you again, and enjoy your happy retirement. So I'll go back to the board. What we're going to do now is head over to committee room 1 to deal with some in-camera items, and then we'll come back into public session. So I'm just going to ask for a motion to, recess the public portion of the meeting and return to our BMO meeting. So moved by Jeff and Vanessa. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Carries. So for the members of the media and the public, we'll be coming back in here to continue with the rest of the board meeting, but we'll be heading into in-camera to complete some board business that's important. All right, I'll just call the meeting back from in camera. So we're going to jump right into the budget. So I know many of you following from home. I'm just going to turn over to the budget chair to kind of give us a background of what happened last week and to just kind of provide us with a little quick synopsis of that.
Well, thank you, Chair, and I want to say thank you very much to the administration who put on the public input presentation. Although I think we were all hoping to have more members of the public turn out, I think it was a good improvement to the overall process and certainly gave people an opportunity to find out what was going on. And I know some folks weighed in afterwards with their views, which I think was helpful. This is a long process to get to the multi-year budget. I know this is the second one that we are dealing with as a London Police Services Board, and it's very important that we get it right for the citizens of London and for the community and for all the folks who are working both on the civilian and the sworn side for the London Police Service. So I think we've heard from folks about the draft. We have to make a decision and submit a budget to municipal council, both on the operating and the capital side. And at this point, I'd like to propose that we proceed with essentially what has been proposed by the administration, but slightly revised so that there would be 5 new positions added rather than the number that were proposed in the draft budget. And so the amounts in the first year would be essentially the same because the 5 positions in the first year would be the same. And then slightly less in 2021, so $117,840,419. And then in 2022, $121,098,834. And then in the last year, $123,024,700. So essentially save in the last year about $960,000 less in the last year of the budget because there would be 5 positions added rather than all of those positions over the course of the multi-year budget.
So I see that a motion by the budget chair. I believe there's a seconder in the mayor. And just before we get into that, I just want to ask, I know subcommittee dealt with this item. I just want to ask the board, I'm comfortable without having to have the presentation of the budget. I'll just look to the other board members if they're okay with just moving forward since, great. So the motion is.
Moving forward with the vote? Or?
No, sorry, one second. So we're just going to be moving forward without the presentation that they did from last week. You were there last week, so we had that opportunity as well as the members of the public. If it's helpful, Jesse, maybe administration could talk about what your, if they're able to provide some comments about what that might look like. So maybe I'll turn over to the deputy or chief.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. As you recall, last week, we did make a presentation to the public with regard to a staffing request for 20 new officers spread, or 20 new employees spread over 4 years. After that public consultation and further consultation and refining, we have reduced that to 5 officers in 2020 as our request and have removed the remaining 15 employees from our 2021, 2022, and 2023 budget term. We will get the job done. We will get the job done.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Just look for any other board members to discuss. Vice Chair Toth.
I want to thank everybody for all the hard work that they've done. And I want to thank administration for being able to be flexible and working with what the board has provided. I just want to take this opportunity to remind everyone and perhaps remind City Council that we hear on a daily basis, and I'm sure administration hears even more, concerns, at least public concerns about the mental health of our first responders, right? That is someone that everyone, for the most part, is on the same page about. We hear about it, we talk about it, it's in the news. We hear constantly from members of the public that they want more police, they want more foot patrols. We've heard that. We have presentations from people living in the Talbot area. We hear it from our downtown, we hear it in Old East, it's the same. Every campaign, every municipal campaign, provincial campaign, I hear calls about investing in our police. I heard last week, the president of the LPA, Rick Robson, came to us and he spoke about the coroner's report, which was related specifically to addressing how many death by suicides are facing first responders right now. And one of the things that the coroner pointed out was that staffing is directly tied, adequate staffing levels are directly tied to increase in the wellness of our first responders and decrease in death by suicide. But these things are not free. They cost money. So when the rubber hits the road, I want to see a commitment to investing that amount. I'm grateful that we have a lean police service, a police service that's willing to work with what they've got, and they do a really great job. But what I find very frustrating is that everyone talks the talk, and I'd like to see people start walking the walk as well. We have a lean budget. You guys want more police officers in foot patrol? You need to invest. So I just wanted to put that on the record that I think it's important. I wish we were adding more than 5, but that is the budget, and it is what it is. But I just want to make sure that people are very clear about what that means.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Before I go over to Chief, just see if there's any other comments or questions. Go ahead, Chief.
I appreciate those comments. I'd like to thank the board for the constructive conversation that sorry.
Sorry, one sec. There was some other speakers I was just saying at the end if you wanted to go. Sorry about that. Or unless you wanted to go right now. No problem. Sorry, Mayor Holder?
Thanks very much, Chief. You can always start and finish anytime. It's all good. I'd like to thank the board for its support. Look, we're all members of a group that believe in the safety of its citizens as one of the paramount issues. And I think we all get that, and of course we all do. And what we all strike to do anytime that there are budgets is we try to strike that balance between care and cost. It's certainly something I've said many times, and I suspect I will say more times as we go through the multi-year budget process at City Hall. But today it's about the police services board budget. And I have to say that that there isn't one board member that doesn't feel strongly about the important work that our police officers, our frontline folks do on a daily basis, and the pressures and support and that they need. I think I would add comments to Vice Chair Toth that when we speak to the issue of issues that impact our police officers, things like burnout and those challenges, I think it's why we made one of the decisions that we did internally was to get stronger internal support for our officers as the need is required. I think that's important. And I think that showed a great progressive attitude of this board when that was approved. So with all of that, look, would we all like more? I think there is a reality that I think we're coming to terms with. Knowing how you strike that balance is the challenge. But thank you, board, and I guess the message I'm saying to our frontline officers, thank you very much for all that you do to keep Londoners safe.
Just before I turn over to the Chief, just look to my left, see if there's any other board members on there before I just kind of have some comments. Go ahead, Jeff.
Again, I'll thank administration for coming to the table with a plan that, as the mayor says, balances care with cost. Policing has changed drastically in the last 10 years and is going to continue to change. And the way we approach policing, it has to change with it. And I really believe strongly that this budget goes a long way in demonstrating the care that the board has over the frontline officers' well-being and mental health. And I hope that we can continue to, with the support of council, I hope we can continue to invest in the care of our first responders. And I think this budget is a good step in that direction.
Thank you, Member Jeff. If the board will allow me, I just have a question to the Chief and I guess to Deputy Betts, if whoever wants to take at it, or if they both want to. So I recognize, you know, as a chair, I get very often hear from members of council, hear from members of the public, you know, the service, you know, and wanting the level of service and the expectation that the community has, especially with technology and social media and everybody wanting to hear instantaneously and not having to wait half a day or a full day to have someone come back to them. I want us to have that frank conversation because I recognize there's competing priorities always that we have with funding and resources and limited resources, and some of the unexpected impacts from external funding envelopes that we used to receive that have also put us in this predicament as well, and put us in some challenging times. I guess my question to administration is, what are the consequences? You know, I know that's hard to kind of answer right now, but, you know, I think for transparency, for the benefit of the public, of council, for everyone to understand what does this mean, and what could this potentially mean in a year or 6 months, as far as impacts to operations and as far as impacts to what people are used to getting right now versus what maybe might change through.
Thank you. Well, there's risks with any budget. First off, I do appreciate the constructive conversation that we had with the board. We felt listened to, and I know we listened to you, and we all listened to the community and everybody else who had input into the process. We believe that the budget, as set out, in combination with opportunities that we have through assessment growth, mitigate that risk. There's always risk, but I think we'll be in good shape. There's nothing more important than public safety and the wellness of our officers. And, you know, we'll be in good hands. Moving forward, there are significant pressures still in the community, right? They haven't gone away, and we haven't made leaps and bounds above where we were, but we're keeping our head above water, and we're improving, for example, the foot patrol presence, which is very important to many Londoners, and some areas around human trafficking and other areas. It's important that we keep pace with growth in the city, so we intend to you know, access assessment growth funding as it's available to us over the coming years. And year to year, there are annual reviews throughout the multi-year budget process, which we will remain engaged in. And if there's opportunities there, then we'll seize those opportunities. But I'm satisfied with the budget that's set out.
All right. Look for any other board members wishing to speak to any questions? Any more comments from administration? All right, so the motion's been moved in second. I think the members of the public are following and I believe aware of what the motion is. If there's clarification that's needed, the budget chair will be able to provide comment after, I guess. So seeing no further discussion or questions, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? And the motion carries. So I'm going to go to assessment growth funding for 2020, memo 19114.
Thank you. To the board, through the chair. The assessment growth funding, as the chief alluded to, is a separate funding envelope. It is not in baseline budget just for the public. It is, as the city grows, what does that envelope look like and how is that then dispersed throughout the city? The City of London has allocated approximately $1.5 million to London Police for assessment growth funding. And utilizing that money, we have looked at what is a strategic move forward to best allocate those positions moving in 2020. So we have applied in 10 positions, and you'll see that publicly. 4 are for frontline officers, 2 are for communication operators, which obviously handle every call that comes into the police primarily. And then the other 4 are support positions, driving IT and business analytics and that support behind the organization that truly allows us to work smarter and not harder. So you'll see dedication to that infrastructure. But if any questions from the board, but those 10 positions, a summary of each are outlined in the document.
Deputy Mayor?
Well, I'd like to move that so we forward that on to municipal council. And I do want to say, you know, there's different ways that the service is going to grow and it gets divided up because of how it's paid for. But I think overall what we're talking about for 2020 is that there'll be 15 new positions across both the sworn and civilian side if the assessment growth business cases are successful, which I hope that they are. I also want to mention, the chair kind of alluded to it, but there's also the pressure that comes up, and it came up in the public input session when, you know, provincial funding is cut back and we have to find resources to pay for 5 positions, right, that previously were covered by a provincial grant funding. So, you know, there's 15 new positions and there's 5 positions that are being picked up by other funding sources now that the province is not covering them. So that's quite a lot, 20 positions of impact in 1 year. And I think the budget is really doing a good job of trying to balance all those things. And I certainly hope the assessment growth cases, which I think are very well justified in terms of growth, that those are supported by the city and that we receive the funding for that.
So I'll look for a mover. Moved by Deputy Mayor, seconded by the Mayor. Any further discussion or comments? Anything from administration? All those in favor? Carries. Great. So I believe we're going to go to Deputy Betts CSP Ontario Transfer Grant. It's a public information point there, so I'll turn over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is actually going to tie directly into what Deputy Mayor Homer just had to say with regard to provincial grant funding. So the province recently, or fairly recently, reconfigured their grant funding provisions to the police services in Ontario. The new grant that we're working with is called the Community Safety and Policing Grant, and it replaces the CPP grant, the SCOOP grant, and the PAVIS grant. These were initiatives that London Police came to rely on, as most police services do, to staff certain officers within their organization to tackle particular problems. Earlier this year, the Community Safety and Policing Grant was introduced. We received, London Police received notification that we were successful in obtaining a grant in the amount of just over $1.9 million annually for 3 years. That commenced on April 1st, 2019, and it'll end on March 31st, 2022. These funds were utilized to offset expenses for a sergeant and 16 constables that were assigned to the Community Foot Patrol Unit. The new grant considers both provincial and local outcomes and encourages community partnerships to be leveraged, and funding is specific to what's defined as the local priority funding stream. And that focuses on addressing risks to safety and well-being that are prevalent in London. This is consistent with the direction and focus of the Community Safety and Well-being Plan. The 2020 budget includes revenue in relation to the Community Safety and Policing Grant in the amount of $1.9 million. An application for provincial priority funding stream is currently being evaluated by the ministry, but we're not particularly assured that we will receive any funding for that. That leaves us a shortfall, as the Deputy Mayor said, of approximately $640,000 from what we had previously relied upon to provide those core policing functions. That money has to come from somewhere in order to continue those sources, hence the increase in that equivalent amount in our operating budget submission. Giving the available pool for provincial priorities funding stream province-wide, and despite that strong application, we're not anticipating that we will be successful in that other grant that I spoke of, the provincial priorities funding stream. As you've heard me present, the funds that London Police will no longer receive have had an impact on our operating budget. Those funds were relied upon to provide key core services to the City of London. And it's unfortunate that we will not be able to rely upon them, but we are grateful that the operating budget has been received to allow us to continue to provide those services. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments from the board? Susan, Vice Chair.
I think we need to make this crystal clear. These are cuts. This is downloading from the province. You've already heard me speak about my concerns about staffing and the mental health of our first responders, community well-being, and so on. That's not free. I know I'm going to be repetitive, but at this point I don't care. I think we need to drive the point home that these are cuts from the provincial government. In my personal opinion, they're unacceptable, especially on a government that campaigned supporting policing and investing in policing. We're not seeing those investments, and I would really appreciate if perhaps the province came to the table and spoke to us about these cuts, about these $640,000, because that is a direct download to municipalities. And certainly I know that the board member and the chair would be open to a meeting with the appropriate minister, and I would invite the minister to contact us and have those meetings, because this is highly problematic.
Mayor Holder.
Thanks very much. Thank you very much, Deputy, for your report. I think it's clear that the challenges that all governments face and is the reality of how they balance what they need to do to be able to provide the services they can. Having said that, I want to recognize the challenge that that this change in provincial funding support has on our London Police, and I'm actually not going to wait for the minister to contact us, as it would be great, and it would be wonderful if the minister did, but seriously, I'd be absolutely delighted to work with the chair and the board to ensure that as a police services board, we meet with the minister to see if there's any reconsideration. I suspect we'll find that those challenges that have happened to the London Police Service is consistent with police services across the province. But having said that, we've got some very challenging issues in this community. And I think when we look at those challenges that seem to have so many ways exploded downtown and the core of Dundas Street, literally running from the length of Dundas, I think that as one specific area noted, that we need extra help, and I think it's incumbent on us to look for every avenue that we can, and so Chair, I'll look to work through you and the board and our senior administration of the police to have that direct conversation with the minister.
Thank you very much. Look for any other speakers. Seeing none, we'll motion to receive the verbal from Deputy Betts. Moved by Jeff, or seconded by Susan. All those in favor? Carries. The last item we have for public is a 2020 board schedule. We'll post it up at a later date. Not really much changes, but I'll look for a mover. Moved by Susan, seconded by Deputy Mayor. Any discussion? Hold on a second. All those in favor? It carries. So I'll look for a motion to adjourn the public meeting. Moved by Javid, seconded by Jeff. All those in favor? Carries. So I'm just gonna go to the members of the public, as we always do for open mic. Any member of the public has 5 minutes to speak to the board. And I know I see Sean Lewis, but I'm sure he's just here to see what we're talking about in the budget. So not seeing any other members from the public. All right. So thank you, and we'll see you next month. And board members, remind you, we'll be going back into committee room 1 to dispense of some more business, but we'll break until 3 o'clock because I'm sure I see the media coming to talk to a few of us. So thank you very much.